Welcome back to Kevin's European Garage, and today I'm going to be changing out the battery on my 2013 Porsche Cayenne. Porsche was so kind to put this battery in a wonderful spot right underneath the driver's seat. So you kind of have to remove the seat, kind of unbolt it and kind of tilt it back in order to get the battery out, and that's what we're going to do today. Also, per the manual, they recommend that you connect up a battery or the jump box or something like that to the jump start points on the inside underneath the hood. And a couple of reasons for that. So you can still be able to move the seat if necessary. And a couple other things too is that it's one, so you don't lose the presets for your radio. You don't lose the idle speed control, because when you start up the car again, all that data is wiped, so you're gonna have to start all over again. So it's gonna idle maybe a little funky for like 30 seconds or so. You're gonna have to relearn the steering on here. Then there's also the windows. You're gonna have to relearn the start and stop on them, and then you're also gonna have to relearn the sunroof too. So by connecting this up, all that data should still be retained, and we won't have to go through the learning procedure on how to do all that kind of stuff. Okay, so here's the jump points underneath the hood. Pull up on the little tab for your positive and your negatives over here. Always connect up the positive first. And now connect up the negative. All right, and now this thing has got battery power. It's back up so that when we go and remove the battery, we shouldn't lose any of our settings. Okay, so the first thing you're going to do is slide the seat all the way forward. And then next you're going to remove these caps, covering up the bolts. Forward. So if you're about to start this job, get yourself a short 10mm triple square. You gotta be really careful not to strip them out. I'm telling you, short 10mm triple square. All right, so now these are done. Now what we can do is we can slide the seat back and get to the front ones. All right, so we do the same thing over here. Pop these covers off. So this is going to work for the seats, this kind of seat. The other seats might be slightly different. You might have a little bit of a different bracket on it that holds it in place. So you might see something different than what I got here. So now you can see the seat is all floppy. Slowly raise the seat back. And now just be careful, because you got your cable over here. And look at all the great stuff that I find inside here. And before I continue, I'm going to clean that out. Okay, so now it's time to lift the battery cover. So for the first time, this car's never been opened before, these things, you might have to cut the perforations over here, like this. And that's how you know if someone's actually been in here before. So right over here, I'm just gonna have to get some scissors to cut this. Now they make multiple size batteries. Hopefully I got the right one. If not, I'm gonna have to go return it. Luckily enough, Advance Auto is just right down the street, and that's not a problem. Let's get this out of the way. Kind of tuck it up behind here. There we go. All right, so now the next thing to do is we gotta remove the cover, and we gotta take off the There's a mount for the air vent that goes on top of the battery cover right here. It's a T25. You see this thing goes underneath here. So now you got a couple brackets that hold this thing on. Let's get this carpet up underneath here. I'll push this out of the way a little bit. All right, you got two brackets that hold the battery cover on. One of them is back here. And we're trying to get this thing up. So we basically got to do is, it's hard to see it, but I'm going to show you on the other bracket. You just got to push on the top portion of it back towards the battery, and it comes up. Lift the bracket off and over. So much easier if I didn't have to film it to get this thing off, but let's see if I can show you how to do this. Just gonna have to lift this thing back over here like that. Just take this cover, this bracket off the top of this. Now we can get the cover off the battery. And there we go. And here is your battery. A few things you have to be really careful about is one, the battery voltage sensor and your vent. So we're going to take those things off very carefully. Slide it back. Here's your vent. And push this out of the way. Hopefully the tube is nice and malleable and not a problem. It's not the winter, so we should be okay. And then now we want to disconnect the battery voltage sensor off this thing too. Like I said, sometimes things are a little difficult when you're trying to reach over. All right, so let's get this off. Let's get this out of the way. And now we can work on taking off the bolts that hold down the terminals onto the battery. You always want to disconnect the negative first. That looks to be like a 10 millimeter. So let's do that. So there's the negative out of the way. And next we're going to do the positive. And when I do the positive, just to be careful, I'm going, because I have a battery connected up to the jumper points, I'm going to put a rubber glove over this, just to be careful. Like I said, we do have that battery connected up. We don't want to accidentally touch anything positive or touch anything, anything to ground this thing out, just in case. So that's where you're just going to be extra cautious. Okay. And here's your rubber gloves. I feel much better now knowing that this thing is under a set of rubber gloves. Okay, and now we got to take up the brackets that hold down the battery, and there's two of them. First bracket. The second bracket. All right, everything's been disconnected off the battery, and now I just got to lift this heavy sucker out of here because this thing is not light by any means. There we go. Such a wonderful spot. Now let's go compare this one to the new one. So now that I've got this battery out of the car, I can tell that I picked up the wrong one at Advance Auto. Luckily, the Advance Auto is not too far down the street. You can see by the size, it's definitely the wrong one. So unfortunately, when you're looking it up, they can't really tell you which one that you have. They offer 3 different kinds. Hopefully that this isn't the big massive one, because they didn't have that one in stock, and they had this one, and then they had another one. Lucky enough, Advanced Auto had the correct one. This is actually an H8 battery instead of the H7. I assume the H7 is the one for the cars that don't have the automatic start. So that's the only thing I can gather, because online it doesn't really tell you, and the only way that it really says that you can find out is by taking the battery out. But at least I was able to get the battery, and thank God it wasn't an H9, and it was the H8. So here we go, and now it's time to put this into the car. Really careful not to damage any of the wires you got there, especially the little plug in that sensor. So you slide it in and all the way to the forward so it locks underneath. It's got a little tab that sticks over there. So now the next thing I'm going to do is start putting in the brackets. Now next is to put the last one in. Bracket. Alright, I'm held on by a 10mm bolt. I'm not too worried about the torque specs as long as it's just tight. I think it should be just fine. I actually slid this back a little bit, slide that forward. Let's tighten this down first all the way. Lock that battery in place. Because when you tighten this down, looks like it twists a little bit. It's going to try to push the battery back, but let's not let that happen. There we go. All right, so that's nice and tight. Just get this vent tube back in right now before you forget about it. While you're at it, just check your vent tube, make sure there's no cracks or breaks in it or anything like that, because that's the only thing that vents to the outside. So now the first thing we're going to do over here is we're going to connect up the positive terminal. You can see I put it back on here. Just twist it back and forth. Make sure it locks down tight. So make sure when you're connecting this thing up that you don't accidentally touch anything of ground in the car. Any metal. So if you have a plastic handle one like this, instead of a metal handle one, a ratchet, that'd be good. I would use that. All right, now the next one is to connect up your negative terminal. You want to over tighten them, you just want to make sure they're nice and snug. All right, and your battery voltage sensor. Okay. And that is it. So now what's left is just to put the cover back on. So jam this thing back in here. There we go. Alright, cover's on. Now you gotta make sure you put on all 4 latches. So now we can get the carpet back on. See these little hooks have to go underneath the carpet in order to hold back in place. So I'm just doing it right now. Just trying to get these in there. There we go. And that's that. And the last thing to put on is that T25 over here at the very back. Alright, now we can put back down the seat. You gotta line it up in its pin hole over there on that side. There we go. I'm not tightening these up yet. So I want to make sure I can line up the back ones before I tighten these up. So now I'm going to push the seat forward. The one on the left didn't line up easily. The one on the right did. Yep. So it's going to be easy to torque. This I will torque because this is kind of important. All right, now time for the torquing. So now I got this thing in there finally. I'm going to torque it down to a whopping 37 foot-pounds. All right, that's done for the rear. Now let's go finish up the front. $37 foot-pounds. Put the covers back on. All right, and now the next thing to do is start up the vehicle and make sure we have no check engine lights. If we did this right and the battery held and everything, we should have no check engine lights. That means no codes. Nothing that has to be reprogrammed. All right, let's start it up and see what happens. 0 check engine lights. 0 code, 0 nothing on the dash. So that means we're good to go. So that's what happens when you connect the 12-volt battery to the jump terminals. You don't have to worry about any of the stuff about losing any of your settings. All my radio settings are still there, and that's how it's done. So thanks for watching Kevin's European Garage and watching me change my battery in my 2013 Porsche Cayenne. And I will see you guys all soon.